Nick Foles taking over as the starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears after leading the Bears from a 16-point deficit against the Falcons based on a gut feeling from Coach Matt Nagy. Who would have dreamed that if Mitchell Trubisky was benched for Nick Foles, the Bears would also be 3-0? But that's the record they take into this game against the very good Indianapolis Colts at 2-1. Fill in the blank time, Peter. With Nick Foles starting, the Bears are what?
Respectable and a team more suited to make the playoffs than with Mitchell Trubisky. And the one point I would make about Foles, Mike, is that we can say whatever we want about, well, you know, he's never done it for a full season, and boy, look what has happened when he was in this situation. You know what? He's a pretty damn good savior. And I don't say that lightly. I mean it. I mean it because he did it twice in Philadelphia, and he's handed the job in Jacksonville, and he doesn't do it, and then he gets hurt, okay? And now he comes in and plays one of the best quarters of his life to win a game that they had no business winning in Atlanta. So to me, he gives the Chicago Bears the best chance now to be that 7th seed.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, Peter, and my concern is that we've seen him in the past. We've seen him take big hits. His first game as the starting quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars, he exited with a broken collarbone after taking a big hit on a touchdown pass. He took a big hit on a touchdown pass on Sunday. You know, one of the reasons I think that Matt Nagy has been extra respectful of Mitchell Trubisky, didn't name Nick Foles the starter right after the game, waited until Monday morning to make it clear that that's the direction they were going. I think Nagy knows there's a chance he's going to need Trubisky. That even if Foles is the guy, there's a chance he's not going to be able to go, and they're going to need Trubisky back in the field, and he may have to do what he did in week 1, which is bring the team back from a 17-point deficit to win the game.
Look, here's the bottom line to the Chicago Bears situation. Matt Nagy needs to go into every Sunday saying, what do I do this week to win this game? He's not trying to build a Boeing 747. You know, he is trying to tinker and figure out, how am I beating the Indianapolis Colts? How are we gaining yards on Matt Eberflus and Darius Leonard this week? And those are his big issues. And I think he's been good at it so far. And look, we also know, Mike, that based on the body language and the face that we've seen of Mitchell Trubisky on the sidelines, you saw it when they played the Rams last year, you know, that this guy wears his emotions on his face. And, you know, clearly you don't want to lose Mitchell Trubisky when you know there's a decent chance you're going to need him at some point the rest of this year.
And that's what makes what's happened so stunning. I talked to him after the Week 2 win over the Giants, and he sounded so different than he ever had before. There was a confidence there. There was an assuredness there that hadn't been there. And he's 2-0. He's riding high. But there has to be a hell of a story as to why Matt Nagy decided in that moment, in that game, to make the switch. And maybe he just, between looking at the film, watching practice, seeing what Foles was doing, whatever caused him to go with Trubisky week 1 flipped pretty quickly. And they're 3. I never would have dreamed this team would be undefeated at the time the switch was made from Trubisky to Foles. I thought it was coming at some point. I said, hey, at some point Foles is going to play this year. And who would have dreamed that it would be under these circumstances? One interesting fact about this game, the Colts, led by Frank Reich, who was the offensive coordinator of that Eagles team, where Nick Foles came in and after Carson Wentz was injured, led them to the Super Bowl, won the Super Bowl. Reich got the job. Reich knows Foles, knows what makes him tick, Peter. I don't know how much of that makes its way to Matt Eberflus and makes its way into the game plan and makes its way into how they defend Nick Foles. But if any coach out there knows Nick Foles, it's Frank Reich.
Well, there's no doubt about it, and I'll never forget, Mike, one of my favorite stories that I've done in recent years is going to sit with Doug Peterson, Frank Reich, and John
DeFilippo.
Bro, what's his? No,
I thought it was John DeFilippo.
No, in Philadelphia. But anyway, Mike Groh, who was the quarterback coach at the time. Reich was the offensive coordinator, and what happened, they deconstructed how they ended up beating the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl 6 days afterwards. And the reverence that Frank Reich had in that 2-hour session with me and those coaches, the reverence he had for Nick Foles, was just, it's something that I just remember it in his voice every time. Man, Foles. And so there is great admiration and respect. And there's also an acknowledgement that Nick Foles can go on one of these runs again. And Mike, he's got better receivers now in Chicago than he had then in Philadelphia.
And speaking of Philadelphia, one of the ramifications of Nick Foles' return to a starting job, it just adds even more pressure on the Eagles. And I feel like as they've continued to go all in with Carson Wentz, between trading up to making the second overall pick, picking him over Nick Foles after Foles led those 2 great playoff runs that caused some to say maybe Foles is their long-term guy, giving Wentz the big contract. I feel so much pressure and urgency on these Eagles. And let's focus on that Sunday night game on NBC, the Eagles at the 49ers. Carson Wentz needs to be what, Peter, for Philly to pull off the upset of the 49ers?
He needs to take what is right in front of him. He needs to stop thinking, I got to make big plays. He needs to start thinking, I need to make plays, period. And I think if you watched him, every time he throws the ball downfield, you said, oh my God, you get nervous. You get nervous. Whereas the Carson Wentz of the first, 3 months of 2017, you said, oh my God, this guy's the next superstar of football. And so I think he needs to stop trying to do too much, even if it means that he's throwing only wheel routes and intermediate stuff to Zach Ertz. That's what I think he needs to concentrate on.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like he's trying to score 20 points on every play, that he feels like one game is going to push back all of the doubters. The fans in Philadelphia aren't happy. It's Sims and I talked about this week. It's almost as if winning a Super Bowl has made those fans crazier. They want it every year now. It's like a drug. Yeah. Instead of just being happy that they finally have one, they're less patient with the team than they ever were before, because that's the standard that every edition of the Eagles is going to be compared to until the memory of that Super Bowl fully fades. All right, Browns and the Cowboys. A Browns-Cowboys shootout, if it happens, a shootout favors who?
Dallas, because I just trust, I trust Dak Prescott a lot more than I trust Baker Mayfield. And I say that in part because of the weaponry, but in part because I just think that at some point, even though Dak Prescott failed at the end of the Seattle game, I think there's going to be a lot of emotion on Baker Mayfield in this game. First of all, it's almost a home game for him. He lives in Austin. He's a Texas guy, Southwest Conference. This is a big, big deal for him to be playing the Dallas Cowboys in Arlington, Texas, okay? So there's going to be a lot. It's going to be a mega game in his mind. And I think the other part of this is, I had a conversation with Dak Prescott a couple of weeks ago. And the thing that really stuck with me about that is, and it sounds weird, but the reverence he had for C.D. Lamb. And just what C.D. Lamb brings to this offense is basically, when you play Cleveland, you got to worry about Myles Garrett, okay? But if you have a lot of weapons and you can neutralize Myles Garrett, you should be able to find those weapons. And so that's why I just believe right now this week in the Cowboys a little bit more. But can I just say one other thing, Mike? And I don't mean to monopolize this, but in my opinion, right now, when you look at the Cowboys, Aldon Smith has been a huge star. You made the point the other day. It's amazing how he doesn't win, defensive player of the month in the NFC. He's leading them in sacks. What an incredible story. Hasn't played in 5 years. It's unbelievable. Here is the bigger thing about the Dallas Cowboys and why we're all saying, hey, the Browns got a chance. Because DeMarcus Lawrence and Everson Griffin, in 238 snaps combined between them in 3 games, have 1 sack and 2 significant quarterback pressures. That is not good enough. You're basically telling Aldon Smith, hey, listen, you got to do it all. So to me, I really think the Cowboys have got to get better production from their big stars on the defensive front.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Peter, because one of the things that Sims and I have identified is a line of demarcation between the good quarterbacks and the great quarterbacks. The good quarterbacks can run the play that's called, but when it all falls apart, they can't get it done. They can't improvise. They can't come up with a second unscripted play to save the play that failed. The great quarterbacks have the mobility and the ability to keep the play alive and make a good decision and get the ball down the field. And I put Baker Mayfield and Gardner Minshew kind of right on that borderline where against some teams, they can outrun the pass rush and they can maneuver and they can improvise if they need to. Against other teams, they can't. And it's just a question of how good is that pass rush. And that's the challenge for the Cowboys. And you hit the nail on the head. Aldon Smith is unstoppable. Even when you double team him, he fights through it. It's incredible to see what he's doing. If he could just get some help from the other guys in that front 7, then you make Baker Mayfield into a guy who can't pivot away from the play that's called and extend the play with his legs because he's getting swallowed up by the pass rush.
Look, the other thing that you have to admire about Aldon Smith is that he knew that all eyes were going to be on him and that he was going to have to perform and perform early or everybody would be saying, what a wasted thing by the Cowboys. You can't take a guy who hasn't played football in 5 years and say, hey, play a feature role in our defense. So there was a lot of pressure on Aldon Smith early, and he has totally responded. So far, Mike, the best game that any defensive player has played in the NFL in the first quarter of the season, Aldon Smith at Seattle in Week 3.
Yeah, that's the thing. Shaq Barrett's the defensive player of the week for chasing around a bunch of backup quarterbacks in Denver. Aldon Smith sacked Russell Wilson 3 times. He sacked Russell Wilson 3 times. And it's a shame he's not getting the recognition, but we're doing what we can because it's a great story. He was homeless a year ago. Fighting through addiction problems and so far winning. And it's sad, Peter, to think of what he could have been if he would have been playing continuously from 2013 or so when his problems really escalated until now. All right, Saints at Lions. Through 3 weeks, the Saints offense has been what, Peter?
Unsurprising. And you're saying, well, what do you mean unsurprising? And what I will say is that any team that for 70% of a period of time who doesn't have the most explosive weapon on offense, and this is a guy who Drew Brees has grown to lean on every time he goes back to pass. If you don't have Michael Thomas, I mean, how good are you going to be? So I'm not really shocked. And Mike, I know everybody is making a huge deal. Oh my God, Brees, he's falling. He's not going to be able to rebound. All I'd ask you to do is and again, stats can lie. I get that. But if you look at his statistics, yards per attempt, completion percentage, things like that, the important things, to me, he's not horrible compared to the last 3 or 4 years. And the reason why he's not having the success throwing downfield, in my opinion, Traquan Smith is not Michael Thomas. And so I want to give him a fair chance with his complement of players to still be a great player. And without having Michael Thomas in there, I think it's a little bit unfair to be digging a hole for the guy.
Amazing to say it's a desperation game for the Saints this weekend, but it is. They need this one after losing 2 in a row. Even more desperation in Houston. Winless Vikings, winless Texans. The loser of this game is what, Peter?
All but eliminated from the playoff hunt. You don't go 0-4. What is it? One team has gone 0-4 and made the playoffs.
92 Chargers. 92 Chargers. Bobby Ross's first year there.
Yeah, and look, it would be one thing if I could look at either of these teams and say they could go on a 7-game winning streak. I mean, look, Kirk Cousins can get hot, but can Kirk Cousins win 7 in a row? With this team right now the way it is, I don't see it. Can Deshaun Watson overcome the problems he has on his offensive line? And can their defense be dominant again in Houston? I don't see it. Neither of these teams can recover from 0-4.
And even at 0-3, it's a long shot. Here are the odds to win the division from PointsBet Sportsbook, the new official sports betting partner of NBC Sports. Houston plus 750, even at 0-3 in a division where, well, the Titans are 3-0, but it feels like they're living on borrowed time. They've beaten 3 teams that just aren't very good, grand scheme of things, by a total of 6 points. Minnesota at plus 900, and there are the Giants at plus 2,200. I'm surprised by that for the Giants because they're in the worst division. At 0-3, they're only a game out of first place, Peter. I'm not ready. That just seems long. That's a slap in the face for the New York Football Giants because I think everybody's still alive in the NFC East.
You want to know why those odds are so long? Because Daniel Jones, who spent all off season, whatever it is that he did, and I don't know what he did, trying to make sure that he doesn't have the turnover bug again, 6 turnovers in 3 games. What has changed? Not much. That's why the New York Giants, and I keep saying this, they're going to win a few games. I don't know, 3, 4, 5, I don't know. They're not awful. The New York Jets are awful. The Giants are not awful. There's a hole between 31 and 32 in this league. A gap, rather.
Best team in New York. Put the signs on the subways.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.